On this Thursday night, motivated by hate. Police investigate a stabbing at an Ontario university that allegedly targeted a gender studies class.
Investigators have reason to believe that this was a planned and targeted attack.
What we know about the suspect and his victims. Air quality alerts. More suffocating smoke fueled by Canada's worst wildfires smothers cities on both sides of the border.
We can barely see the capital.
Plus, the battle to rebuild.
Why aren't these folks getting some service?
2 years since the village of Lytton, BC burned to the ground, our Neetu Garcha returns to find the community dealing with loss and lawsuits. Access denied. Google's plan to block Canadian news after Ottawa tries to force tech giants to pay up.
You can always find things that you can use as a sex toy.
What the hell are you talking about?
Plus, the life and legacy of beloved Canadian broadcaster and trailblazing sex educator, Sue Johansen.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin tonight with what police are calling an attack motivated by hate. A professor and 2 students were stabbed in their classroom at the University of Waterloo. Investigators say the class was targeted because its subject was gender issues.
This incident is a tragic reminder during Pride Month that as we celebrate our progress, the safety and well-being of some in our community is still in question.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called the attack horrifying and unacceptable. A 24-year-old former student is now facing multiple charges. Eric Sorensen is in Waterloo with more on the suspect and his alleged motive.
I'm still a bit of shock, and also I'm just feeling a bit angry.
And, says James Chow, he was scared for his life when a young man entered his classroom, asked what the class was about, and when asked to leave by the gender studies professor, he attacked.
He raised the knife and started chasing the professor. I grabbed a chair right as he cornered the professor in the back of the room and threw a chair at him. And when I threw the chair, I remember seeing the professor was on the ground covering her face and screaming.
A horrific scene as 40 students screamed and fled the classroom. Police were on the scene within minutes. The suspect tried to blend in with other students, but was identified and apprehended. The professor and 2 students sustained non-life-threatening injuries in the attack. The gender studies class was no coincidence, say police. It was a crime of hate.
Investigators have reason to believe that this was a planned and targeted attack motivated by hate related to gender expression and gender identity.
The suspect is 24-year-old international student Giovanni Villalba Elman. He's been charged with 3 counts of aggravated assault plus weapons charges.
I didn't really believe it initially, and then I saw my phone, it was on email.
Pranav Shireen has classes in Hagee Hall every day.
Our community is so safe, right? I never saw something happen like this.
Throughout the university, shock and dismay that a peaceful day on campus turned horribly violent.
I know that we didn't receive any notification from the school at the time.
There was a very unfortunate delay.
The university admits its emergency response system, which was just tested that morning, did not kick in quickly enough to alert the wider campus. The attack occurred during Pride Month, a time that promotes inclusiveness and celebrates the LGBTQ2+ community.
While this is shocking and horrific act, it must be denounced. We must make it exceptionally clear that hate or prejudice in any form is unacceptable.
Late in the day, a rally was held in Waterloo to stand up for a community that once again has been targeted while simply seeking acceptance. The accused has been remanded in custody and there will be a bail hearing next week. Several students told us they were shaken by what happened, but they believe that it was an isolated incident and that the University of Waterloo campus remains a safe place. Jeff?
Eric Sorensen in Waterloo, Ontario tonight. Thanks, Eric. Much of southern Ontario is breathing easier today as that wildfire smoke that blanketed the region began to clear, but alerts remain in place for millions south of the border.
We can barely see the capital, so it's weird.
Washington, D.C. was home to the world's worst air quality at one point today as smoke from hundreds of Canadian wildfires drifted over the northeastern United States. More than 20 states were placed under some form of air quality alert. In the south, millions more are dealing with a deadly heat dome, with temperatures in several states expected to top 40 degrees. And it was 2 years ago this week that another deadly heat dome shattered records in Canada and led to one of the worst wildfire disasters this country has ever seen. 3 straight days of record heat helped to fuel a fire that destroyed hundreds of properties in Lytton, BC. That community was reduced to ash, and since then, efforts to rebuild have hit a wall. Our Neetu Garcha has been speaking with residents who remain in Lytton. Neetu.
Jeff, the nearly 2-year local state of emergency lifted last week, but the rebuilding hasn't even begun. The mayor says not a single building permit has been issued.
For anyone passing by, it's hard to tell there was a village here.
We haven't started rebuilding yet. It's just unbelievable and hard to imagine.
Denise O'Connor, who was born and raised here and lost her home in the fire, says the first phase of recovery, including remediation and archaeological reports, is almost done.
This was my home. Yeah, we lived here for 30-something years.
The next phase includes installing utilities and services.
It has seemed, and maybe it still seems, that Lytton has really been forgotten or swept under a rug.
Megan Fandrich's home is among the few that didn't burn, but living here has been difficult.
To get a jug of milk for my daughter, I would have to drive at least an hour on a bad road, but it was just lush green forest.
The single mother looks down to where her business once stood, a beloved coffee shop destroyed.
There needs to be some sort of accountability.
The village's insurance provider has now filed a claim against Canada's 2 national railways, CN and CP, as well as Transport Canada.
Freight trains are a common sight in Lytton. According to the court filing, a coal train had just passed through the village less than 20 minutes before the first report of a fire near these tracks.
The claim alleges they were negligent to let trains pass through the town during an unprecedented heat wave and extreme wildfire risk. The fire ravaged 90% of the town's buildings. 2 people were killed and several others were injured. None of the allegations have been proven in court, and the Transportation Safety Board says it completed its investigation without interviewing residents.
Most of the work I've been doing is with the Indigenous community.
Bruce Ramsey is a certified traumatologist in the Greater Vancouver area. He also works with Lytton First Nation.
Basically, the village still does not exist. I was shocked and I was angry and I was a little embarrassed, actually, to be a tax-paying person in the province of BC. Like, why aren't these folks getting some service?
I think there's going to be huge lessons learned on how to do things differently.
O'Connor says especially with so many other communities across Canada already under threat from wildfires, it's important for everyone that Lytton residents get answers, accountability, and action.
The TSB says it found no evidence linking the fire to nearby train activity in a report released in 2022. There is an ongoing investigation by the BC Wildfire Service and the RCMP. Residents waiting for answers say without an official cause of the devastating fire, it's hard to find closure. Jeff?
Neetu Garcha in Lytton, BC. Thanks, Neetu. Google says it's pulling the plug on Canadian news content. It plans to remove links to news sites on all platforms in this country. The move follows a similar announcement from Facebook over the federal government's new law that forces tech giants to pay up. Mackenzie Gray reports on Ottawa's cyber standoff.
It's the latest blow to the Prime Minister's plan to force big tech to cut deals with media publishers for sharing and directing users to online news content. Google blocking Canadian users from Canadian news. Bill C-18 has become law and remains unworkable, the tech giant said. We've been saying for over a year that this is the wrong approach to supporting journalism in Canada.
Well, I think this definitely is a really brazen admission that Google and, to another extent, Facebook really don't give a fig about news in Canada.
Google's move surprising the minister responsible.
We spoke to them this morning. My chief of staff spoke to them. I met with them last week.
The feds had hoped to use this legislation to help the struggling media industry, which has lost millions in ad revenue to the big tech platforms, all while thousands of journalists have been laid off. Global News is among Canadian media organizations which already has a partnership with Google, which pays to share news content. Google pulling out of Canadian news could have even more damaging consequences.
Unfortunately, this means a huge drop in revenue for many journalist organizations, particularly smaller ones who tend to depend the most on social shares.
Facebook had already announced they would drop Canadian news, and they increased the pressure today, canceling a fellowship program that supports the hiring of emerging journalists at the Canadian press. A senior government source had written off coming to a deal with Meta, but had expressed optimism an agreement with Google could be made. And that same source says the Liberals have no plans to back down on their new law, setting the stage for a major political divide.
And Justin Trudeau has tried to shut down competition by passing censorship laws.
Google said they pull out of Canadian news before the final regulations come into force. That's expected to take 6 months, leaving time, Jeff, for a deal to be made with the Liberals.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thanks, Mac. Financial experts are sounding the alarm about Canadians' ability to deal with their debt. Canada's household debt is now the highest of any G7 nation. And with higher interest rates, new data shows more people are turning to their credit cards to pay the bills. Anne Gaviola has more on our credit conundrum.
The cost of just about everything continues to climb. Food to rent to mortgages.
A lot of these are putting a real burden on people's pocketbook.
Pushing more of us to use credit cards just to get by.
If you don't have the money, as I said, if you don't have the money readily available, the easy decision in the moment is to just put it on your credit card. Though it just ends up creating a really vicious cycle.
Recent data shows plastic reliance by businesses and households is on the rise. According to consumer credit reporting agency Equifax, spending on credit cards is up more than 21% compared to before the pandemic.
People that are using these credit cards more are ones that pay less than 90% of their credit card off every month.
Insolvency experts say that, and more people turning to ultra-high interest payday-style loans, many with annual interest rates over 400% plus fees, can all lead to a lifetime of financial hardship.
So people will be saddled with this debt, potentially for the rest of their working career if they don't pay down more of the principal.
Interest rates in the 20% range on credit card debt can quickly snowball.
Now you're having to come up with that much more that you didn't have in your bank account to begin with, which means you end up financing more, and then you just keep going further and further down that rabbit hole.
If you're in a financial bind, step 1 is take stock of your financial situation. Figure out how much money is coming in and how much you're spending. Step 2, if needed, find professional help.
Some people literally have to change their lifestyle and buy less. Don't buy luxury items, just buy essentials. Buy cheaper where they can.
For every dollar the average Canadian household earns, it owes $1.85. For many, cutting back can go a long way towards ensuring this is a financial rough patch and not the path to a debt trap. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
RoseAnne Archibald is out. Coming up, why the Assembly of First Nations National Chief was impeached. There's a major shakeup at the Assembly of First Nations. AFN chiefs voted to fire their national leader, RoseAnne Archibald. She was elected in 2021, becoming the first woman to hold the post. But as David Akin reports, an investigation found she violated the organization's code of conduct.
Goodness and love.
RoseAnne Archibald made history in 2021 when she won the top job at the Assembly of First Nations, the first woman to be the national chief, elected with a mandate to shake things up.
Voices are being heard that were never heard before.
But she makes history as she leaves that top job, the first national chief, man or woman, to be removed before the end of her 3-year term.
I supported the national chief when she ran for election, but it was just time to move on.
Assimilation and genocide.
The Assembly of First Nations is the country's largest Indigenous advocacy group. Its national chief is selected by majority vote of the country's 634 First Nations chiefs. On Wednesday, just 231 of those chiefs had a day-long Zoom call, and then 163 of them, or 71%, voted in favor of removing her. Archibald's defenders believe her gender played a role, that the chiefs would never have voted a man out of the job, but Archibald could not overcome the findings of a third-party investigator that found she abused her staff and violated the Assembly's code of conduct.
We have to keep everybody accountable regardless what part of the staff of the AFN you are in. If you're in the top part or if you're administrative, we're all equal in that office.
There were just too much damages right now, and we just need some healing and time for this.
Healing now needed after one of the most divisive episodes in the organization's history. Jeff.
Thanks, David. David Akin in Ottawa. And for more on the fallout from this impeachment, let's go straight to our Melissa Ridgen in Winnipeg. Hi, Melissa. So what's been the reaction from grassroots members? And what do you think this means for the future of the AFN?
Well, Jeff, reaction has been largely head shaking and eye rolls. You know, the Assembly of First Nations deals with the government of Canada as a lobbyist for First Nations issues. The criticism has always been that it doesn't represent what people want or what they expect. They have no say in what happens at the AFN. It's only chiefs that have a seat at that table. So Archibald campaigned on change. She campaigned on accountability, including on things like spending and putting the brakes on perceived entitlements in the organization. How she went about it, how she treated some folks, it looks like that was problematic and perhaps worthy of some sanctions or some discipline of some sort. But some are saying that she was removed before she could accomplish what it was she was elected to do.
The questions that she asked are crucial, and we will now never have the answers for, because what will happen now is the regional chiefs will now appoint someone who will be favorable to their interests.
And that's what will happen next. An interim national chief will be selected until another election can be held at the end of this year.
All right, Melissa Ridgen in Winnipeg, thanks. Riots and unrest still ahead. Protesters in France clash with police over the deadly shooting of a teenager. Devastation in central Chile after an overflowing river triggered a landslide. At least 2 people are dead and 4 are missing after multiple communities flooded during heavy rains. The army is now working to move mud and debris off the streets. It's estimated nearly 14,000 people are affected by the flooding. And there was another day of protests in France over the death of a teenager shot by police during a traffic stop. Police fired tear gas into the crowd, where thousands turned out to march in memory of the 17-year-old. Redmond Shannon now on the growing outrage and the charge against the officer involved.
Thousands join a mother screaming for justice over the death of her only child. In the 2 days since the police killing of the 17-year-old, publicly known only as Naël, France has seen unrest and rioting spread. Starting in the Paris suburb of Nanterre, where he lived and died. Thursday's march also turned into chaos. Police the target of the anger they are trying to quell. The video of the shooting during a Tuesday morning traffic stop, the spark for that fury. The officer who fired the shot now under arrest and charged with voluntary homicide. French President Emmanuel Macron initially called the shooting inexcusable, injustifiable, now using similar language to refer to the violent protests that targeted parked cars and public buildings, including schools. The government has deployed 40,000 police officers to the streets. Their fear is that this could spiral further and mirror the type of rioting seen across France in 2005. That unrest born out of the disaffection and racism experienced by immigrant and minority communities in the suburbs of Paris and major cities. Many of those protesting and rioting now feel little has changed since then. A period of time almost exactly matching Naël's life. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
It would get very hot in there, I would think.
You better believe it, darling.
Up next, remembering beloved Canadian sex educator Sue Johansen. For generations of Canadians, she was known for her straight talk on taboo topics. Sue Johansen, a celebrated educator who spoke about sex with an uncommon frankness and honesty, has died at the age of 93. Heather Yerkes-West looks at her legacy and why her message remains relevant today.
I was told that the first thing you want to do is dispel some common myths.
Men are convinced that to be a good lover, they've got to have this humongous...
As a sex educator, Sue Johansen had no fear.
Strike matches on it.
By the early 2000s, her celebrity as the granny who'd answer all your intimate questions had spread to Hollywood. But for decades, Sue Johansen was Canada's own.
Condoms. They'll do the trick.
Educating young people over the airwaves long before it was possible to do a Google search.
She had that very deep voice, and I remember being at the time kind of shocked, like, oh my gosh, she's talking about that?
After navigating her own teenage years without a mother, Johansen opened Canada's first birth control clinic inside a high school when her own daughter was still a student there.
I'm so proud of who she was and what she did.
With her call-in radio show launched in 1984 and a TV show later on, Johansen helped young people learn about sex as the world came to grips with AIDS.
Mom was fearless and made no bones about having a lot of AIDS patients from Casey House come up to her cottage every summer.
Although she slowed down in her 80s, Johansen never truly retired. Pained in recent years to see so much progress made for women's sexual health, appear to take steps back.
Especially about abortion in the States, that I remember once she reacted by just shutting her eyes, shaking her head, and turning her head away. Just like, I can't fix this.
But because of her legacy, a new generation of educators have stepped in to take her place.
I was never seen as a sex kitten. I had the gift of the gab.
Life lessons from a tough-talking granny millions of Canadians will never forget. Heather Urex West, Global News, Calgary.
Thanks, Sue. And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is this beaver chilling in the South Saskatchewan River. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.